How to study for the MCAT Part 2. Identify your strengths and weaknesses and adjust your plan accordingly. If Part 1 was strategy, then Part 2 is tactics. You need to identify your strengths and weaknesses so you can guide your studying in the best direction. Now, the way to do this initially is to take a diagnostic test before you do any studying whatsoever. And this accomplishes two things. First and foremost, it gives you a real sense of the challenge and the difficulty that you're up against. If you're like me, and I'm certain many of you studying for this test probably are, sciences in school have more or less come pretty easy for you. And while you certainly don't think the MCAT's any walk in the park, you probably really don't understand just how difficult this test really is, and taking a diagnostic to start your studying will give you a feel for that, and that's key. Second, and probably more importantly, is it lets you compare and contrast your perceived strengths with your actual strengths. Now, on that first diagnostic, I figured, hey, I'm awesome at physics, I'm going to do the best in the physics section. I did the worst in that section. I got a 9 on my diagnostic, and this just blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. But what that said to me was, well, you really need to concentrate more on physics studying, at least initially, until you really get this stuff down. So I went to Wiki Pre-Med and started out with just all of his physics videos. Eventually I reached a point where I felt pretty good, I felt pretty comfortable, and I determined that the returns were starting to become a little diminished. So I figured it was time to move on to biology and organic chemistry, and I did. And this gets back to part 1 about knowing yourself. Once you start feeling really comfortable in a subject, certainly if you have the time, go ahead and learn more. You want to get the best score possible, but you also want to get a balanced score. It's much better to get a 10 in each subsection than it is to get a 12, a 10, and an 8. So don't neglect the other subjects at the expense of really focusing on just the physics. Okay, so learning the test and other minor details. The AAMC offers 10 practice tests. One is free, the others are $35, but they're well worth it. I just took 3 practice tests at the end of my studying, and I mostly based that decision because I'm a pretty thrifty guy, and I feel that I should have taken at least 1, if not 2 more. Although I still felt pretty confident that I'd learned the test well enough, and I was averaging about a 37, so I felt good. But I would definitely take them regardless of how many it takes until you feel confident. And I would almost exclusively stick with the AAMC and not any diagnostic offered by Kaplan or the Princeton Review or whatever it is that you're studying with. For a bunch of reasons. One is the format offered in these AAMC practice tests is the exact same format as you will see on the actual test, and this is comforting. When you get there on test day, you will be nervous. Everyone gets nervous, and seeing something with which you're familiar helps calm your nerves. It really does. And another reason is there are many things that you can do to manipulate the AAMC versions. For instance, you can write notes in the margins as you go along. You can get rid of the time limits. I'm a fast test taker, so I did the test at my leisure one day over the course of more hours than you can actually do it because I knew I wouldn't have any sort of time considerations. But for me, the most helpful thing was for the verbal, and the best way to learn the verbal is to practice verbal passages, and certainly with these practice tests, that's what I'd recommend. But I just couldn't get above about an 11 or so in my practices, and I really wanted to do better than this. And the option that helped me the most was this option that let me look at what the actual answer was as I was going along in the test. Now, you can see the answers after you finish up, but this didn't really help me because it's such an intense thinking and reasoning-based test. I just couldn't really remember what I was thinking at the moment when I went back to all these questions, and just being able to see the answer after I'd already decided on something and checking, it's like, oh, okay, got it. That's exactly how I should approach this. And for me, that was the difference. That really helped me out. So something else that I did, this would be included in the minor details, was I would intentionally not go back to the really tough questions at the end. And I feel like this is why I scored higher on the actual test than I did in my than I averaged on the practice tests. And you should expect to score anywhere in the range. Don't expect to score your average on the real thing, anywhere in that range. just due to random effects or due to being really excitable and you just got nervous or whatever. But I knew that I would score higher on the actual thing than on the practices because I was intentionally not going back to the really tough questions and thinking about them again because I'm a very fast test taker. So on the practices, I was finishing the science sections 30 minutes before the time limit ran out. On the real test, I went back to those tough questions. I feel like I was able to get the correct answer, at least on a few of them, and that's why I got the 39 versus my average of the 37, and I still had plenty of time to do that. So that's one minor detail. Another one is state-dependent memory. I was a psych major, and basically, to sum up what state-dependent memory is that if you are drinking caffeine while you're studying, then being in a caffeinated state when you need to recall the information that you learned is what you want to do. So most administrations of the MCAT are in the morning. I'm a coffee drinker, so the physics and chemistry section is always first. When I was studying physics and chemistry, I'd have some caffeine right before that, and then the biology section comes last a few hours later. So when I tried to when I was studying biology, I tried to drink caffeine a few hours before then just for state-dependent memory effects. Now that's getting a little bit crazy, I know, but it's something to do. Could help. Maybe it didn't help at all, I don't know, but it was still just kind of something fun and interesting for me to do. And that's it. That's all I have to say on how to study for the MCAT, other than good luck.